demons attaching themselves to things. I picked this up out of the London Times when I was in Europe a couple of years ago. When Mrs. Jane Summer was offered a rare Scottish chair for £1,800, she snapped it up. It was an unusually well-preserved oak wainscot dated 1684 and reputed to have been used as a seat in which Scottish witches were tried and condemned. Mrs. Sumner, an antiques dealer, decided to keep it for herself on the landing of her cottage in Wiltshire. But, she says, the chair refused to stay where it was put. On the first night, it walked halfway across the floor. The whole place suddenly seemed full of fear and foreboding. It was terrifying. On my way into the house, I could feel evil coming down the stairs. The arms seemed to reach forward and grasp me. She moved the chair downstairs and came home late at night to find a jackdaw sitting on top of it. That was the last straw. I knew it had to go. She moved the chair to her antique shop in Saffron, Waldron, near Cambridge. Overnight, she says, the shop became filled with spiders, and one the size of a mouse was found huddled at the base of the chair. Mrs. Summer, who says she is not normally superstitious, has put the chair up for sale at the London Antique Dealers Fair next week. I can't wait to get rid of it, but I'm almost afraid for the person who buys it, she says. I'm not sure what the skeptics do with those kinds of accounts. Hear them quite often. Let's pray together. Father, again today we rejoice that you have exalted above all things your name and your word, that you are the sovereign Lord over heaven and earth, that there is your integrity between your character and word, and that we can depend upon it. When it tells us that you defeated the enemy, we believe that. When it tells us that we are adopted into your family, we can join us with your Son, we believe that. Lord, I pray that you will help us to live up to our privileges in the gospel today. Pray that you will help us to reflect your glory to those with whom we come in contact, that we may be true intimates of your peace, that we may be part of the healing that we know you want to do in the lives of many people, and ultimately part of the establishing of your church in all the world. So grant to us new vision, new faith, new courage, all of those gifts and graces we need to live to the praise of your glory. We ask in Christ's name. Amen. For all of our modern technology, we haven't learned to make roofs. That's one thing that just boggles my mind. I was president of a college for 10 years, and flat roofs were one of my great problems. We built a new dormitory and got a 20-year bonded roof on it. It was to be good for 20 years. At the end of 10, we had to tear the whole thing off and put a brand new roof on. I asked a builder once why that was true, why they couldn't put a roof on that didn't leak. It seemed like almost any roof they put on a building, a flat roof, leaks. He said, well, they make it with the leftovers of the petroleum industry. They make roofing with the leftovers of the petroleum industry, and they put it on with the leftovers of the labor market. I don't know whether that was just his pessimistic view of the thing, but it is just amazing to me how much trouble we have with roofs for all of our modern technology. Anyhow, we'll live with the drippings, I guess. We were talking about the personal level of power encounter, and we had talked or come down to the mental, what I call the mental emotional category. Satan works in many, many ways on our minds, and we've talked about some of those as we have gone along. Let me just quickly review a few. First of all is this whole concept of deception and accusation. He is telling us lies aimed at the mind. 2 Corinthians 4, 3 and 4, the God of this world has blinded the minds of those that believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel should shine to them. That's his basic tactic for the unbeliever. Ephesians 4, 17 and 18, Paul says, you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking, darkened in their understanding because of the ignorance that is in them. Satan wants to keep us in ignorance of the truth of God, and thus to keep us in bondage to him to that extent. Error, wrong beliefs is certainly fertile ground. Romans 1:28 talks about a reprobate mind. Titus 1:15, a defiled mind. 1 Peter 3:17, be on guard so that you may not be carried away by the error of lawless men. Unbelief, related to that, refusal to act on the character and word of God, and there certainly is a lot of that even in the church. Fear is really based on unbelief. Many people are like the unbelieving spies who went in and said, this is the land, this is what God has told us about, but we're not strong enough to overcome the enemies that are in this land. And that unbelief keeps us. And Satan really feeds that, of course. And then there are the attitudes that we bring to life. Ephesians 4:22 and 23. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. I came back from the mission field in 59 to teach missions, and I said to my wife, I don't know whether I can teach anybody much about missions, but if I can just teach them some right attitudes, it'll be worthwhile, because I'd seen so many destructive attitudes during our brief stay on the mission field at that time. And Satan, of course, delights to perpetuate those wrong attitudes, the whole attitude of mind. There's a lot, though, the scriptures have a great deal to say about the mind. I have I'll bother with it now, but a diagram that I use to talk about that at times. And while that sounds like it's a cognitive approach to the subject, and to a certain extent it is, our theory that says you can't separate these two comes into play, that Satan starts with that which is natural and intensifies it, and thus complicates the whole picture. And so he's active in all of these ways. Wrong doctrines, 1 Timothy 4:1 talks about doctrines of demons. And there are a lot of things even within the church that are of this nature. One of the key marks of a cult is the claim for absoluteness of theology. I think we mentioned that earlier. And there are a lot of churches that are claiming that level of truth for their own theology. And that's a step, at least, in the direction of being a cult. And that's the kind of thing that Satan thrives on. Unforgiveness, I've already said, probably does more harm than any other thing. Paul says, and what I have forgiven, if there was anything to forgive, I have forgiven in the sight of Christ for your sake, in order that Satan might not outwit us. For we are not unaware of his schemes. So his scheme is to get you to believe that you have a right to not forgive. I was talking just last night about a young man that's been in touch with us, and the person said, well, it may not be just a simple matter, because the man is simply bitter toward his wife. Well, obviously, if there isn't a readiness to forgive a person that is that close to you, why, you certainly are giving ground to Satan. And as Paul says, Satan has outwitted that person, even though the rest of his life he seems to be a almost an exemplary Christian. That one area, Satan has a foothold in his life. Same with anger and Satan's attacks in general. Well, we've talked about that in certain other connections, so I think we'll leave it for the moment. Except let me just reinforce the idea that we've got to speak the truth. We've got to admit what's there. We've got to say what God says about it, and then take action against it. I went to bed one night very discouraged. I normally have no trouble sleeping. I usually go to sleep before I go to bed, not having trouble to go to sleep after I go to bed. I have a reputation for going to sleep in my chair, among those who know me, and particularly proud of that. That's the way it is. I don't have trouble sleeping. I can sleep almost any time, anywhere, strange beds or whatever. But this night I wasn't sleeping. I was going over and over and over a situation in my mind, and I was frankly very discouraged. I was kind of lying there like a limp dish rag, and my wife knew that something was wrong, though I hadn't said anything about it. I'm not a very good communicator, and all of a sudden she knew that something had happened because I rolled over and went to sleep. And what had happened was that I said, Lord, I know this isn't coming from you. You want me to sleep. I've got work to do tomorrow for you, and I'm not going to be prepared to do that if I lie here half the night going over and over and over this situation. So, well, I should back up and say that he first said to me, can't tell you how he said it, but the thought went through my mind at least, why don't you practice what you preach? You preach that discouragement is always from the devil, that God encourages us. He tells us to be courageous. Satan discourages us. God is simply not in the business of discouraging us. That two don't go together. So I said, right, Lord, I'm sinning because I am allowing discouragement to control me. Not sinning because I've had this experience or because I have a problem, but because I'm allowing it to control me. So I ask you to forgive me, and I just tell the spirit that's trying to use this against me to get out, and I say I rolled over and went to sleep. It literally was that easy that night. It's not always quite that easy. Sometimes you have to be a little more persistent in your resistance. But I do think that Satan plays a lot of tricks on us in this area and tells us that if we feel that way, that's the way we are, and we're playing games if we try to deny it. Well, you don't deny that you feel that way, but you do refuse that attitude, that feeling, the right to control you. And that can be done, and that's not simply playing games. And my wife will tell you I'm easier to live with since I've learned to do that. We just can't allow our emotions to control us. So, Satan is active in those realms, and he gets great mileage out of it, and the church in general, missionaries in particular. Social relationships, they're all interrelated with the things we've been talking about, but I mention it particularly because I do think Satan has a great vested interest in causing Christians to not be able to get along, to have these personality conflicts, to have incompatibilities that we talk about, particularly in missions. Now, I don't mean to play down the differences between people. We are very different, but I don't think God made us different in order to make us enemies of each other. I think he made us different to complement each other in order that we could bring differing gifts and abilities to the tasks that he gives us to do. But Satan will take advantage of those differences and amplify them in a negative sort of way that causes all kinds of rifts within the church. Again, going back to my administrative experience, I learned a lot about human nature and human problems, trying to get melancholics and cholerics and sanguines to work together. I had one second level administrator who was almost a classic melancholic in the sense that, the ideal was up here and everything had to conform to that, and you just weren't allowed to make a mistake. I mean, a mistake was a disaster. Anything that doesn't come short of that ideal is really intolerable. That's the sort of classic pattern of the melancholic. I had another administrator who was almost a pure sanguine. I mean, may have mentioned this, but he's the one who'd come to work in the morning and say, on a morning like this, "Good morning, the sun's shining, it's a beautiful day, everybody's happy," and, it's shining up there, and he just had that almost incurable optimistic look toward life. Life was to be enjoyed. Don't worry about all the details. Everything isn't going to fall into place just right, and a mistake here or there, that's part of life. I mean, that didn't bother him a bit. And, trying to get these two people to accept each other was really something. And then we had one who was a combination choleric and melancholic. And, the choleric's the kind who drive for goals, and people get in the way, you just kind of push them aside and go on. If you have to step on them, you step on them, but the goal's the important thing. And he came from a family where his father was just like that, and he was an administrator, and here was the son, just the spitting image of him. And then you add to that these extremely high standards that there's no toleration for anything that comes short of that. And he was leaving people strewn all over the place in his wake. And can God work with those kind of people? Absolutely. This man was a super gifted person, and he just needed to be a spirit-controlled person. Instead of that, he was an emotion-controlled person, and he was allowing those things to be destructive instead of constructive. And so often Satan will turn these things into negatives. It's a little dangerous to give illustration like this, but let me try. My wife is very artistic. She is very talented, both musically and in art itself. And she just has an eye for art. When I resigned at Fort Wayne, the school had the tradition of having an oil painting made of past presidents to hang on the Rogues Gallery wall there. And when we went to see the first draft of the portrait that this lady artist was doing, it wasn't very good. And my wife went down that portrait just line by line and told the artist what was wrong with it. She has that kind of an artistic eye, and the artist later admitted that she had missed it the first time around, and that if my wife hadn't told her what was wrong with it, we might have had a bad experience. It wasn't totally good as it was, but it wasn't as bad as it might have been. But all I'm saying is that my wife has that kind of an artistic eye. As a result, she has very specific tastes about what she wears and how she fixes the house and all that sort of thing, which makes it very difficult for me to buy gifts for her, because I tried early in our marriage to buy her clothes, for example, and my taste in clothes was simply not her taste in clothes, at least when it came to the fine points of it. And so I said to her, you have such specific tastes that it's really risky to try and buy something for you. Well, she heard that because of her feelings of inferiority, which come from her background, as saying that's bad, that she shouldn't be that way. Nothing wrong with being that way. That in a sense is a strength. I'm that way. I would really rather people didn't buy me clothes. I want to buy my own clothes because I know what I want and I know what I don't want, and I've got stuff hanging in my closet I almost never wear, but somebody gave it to me, so it's there. And I understand that. I don't think that's bad. I think that's just the way some people are. Now, I know other people who could care less. I had a professor who I'm sure was about as unaware of what he was wearing as he could be, because if he was aware of it and dressed the way he dressed, it was sad news. So, he was the man who, if you heard somebody come tiptoeing into chapel like an elephant, you knew who was coming in. Anyhow, we're different. We're different. But Satan will really amplify those differences, and he'll get us to misinterpret those things as strengths and weaknesses, and it wreaks all kinds of havoc. All of these personality types that we are useful. They're not either good or bad. There's a great tendency to develop in our minds a sort of Mr. Ideal or Mrs. Ideal Christian syndrome. If I could just be like that, now there's the ideal Christian. If I could just be like Dr. Warner, if I could just be like Doug Moo, Don Carson, whoever you want to put up on the pedestal, and you set up just impossible ideals for yourself. There is no Mr. or Miss Ideal Christian. There are many personality types that are going to come out in different fashions, and we've got to learn to accept that. The person who is very emotional looks at the person who is not emotional and says, "Oh, if I could just be like that." Look, they just go along at this constant level. They never seem to be up or down. They just seem to always have everything under control. Wow, that would be great. But if you want something done, that's probably not the person asked to do it. You build a fire under them, they just move over a little bit. And the other hand, that person is looking at this other person who is the go, go, go kind of person, and he's wants things done yesterday, and things are really hopping where he is. And the phlegmatic says, "Oh, if I could just be like that and get things done." Well, that isn't, again, the point isn't that I have to be like somebody else. The point is I have to know who I am, where I fit into the body, and I make my contribution as the person God made me, and not allow this to cause us to be constantly at each other. Satan gets great mileage out of these kinds of things. We brought in a consultant at the college once to work with our administrators on this very issue. And this was the whole point of what this man was teaching, was that there is no right kind of leadership. There are different styles of leadership. He said he was hired by a bank to help hire a new president, and he went to interview a man, and this fellow said, "What do you need all this stuff for? You don't know whether I know how to run a bank. I've been doing it for 25 years. He said, "No question about whether you can run a bank. We know that. That's why we're talking to you. But you need to understand that your predecessor would come to work in the morning, and he'd go to the top floor to the coffee shop, and he would chat with people there, and he'd have a cup of coffee with whoever was around, and he'd walk down the halls and stick his head in all the doors and check on whose baby was okay or not okay or whatever, and eventually he'd get to his office and go to work." The man said, "Now I think I know what you're talking about." He said, "When I go to work, I go to my office and I shut the door and I go to work. None of this small talk and all of that kind of thing." And that's the problem, you see, that we're different in our styles. And when we have shifts in leadership, when we have shifts in people we work with, we expect the new pastor to be like the old pastor. And he isn't. And we have problems with that. So Satan magnifies all of these kinds of things and creates all kinds of broken social relationships. And I really think that many of the things we confront on the mission field are of this nature. Then there is the problem of sorcery and curses that will be practiced against Christians, against the church, against missionaries. The usual approach to the idea of a curse is that it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If somebody tells somebody else they put a curse on them, that they're going to get sick, their mind says, "I'm going to get sick," and so they get sick. And that's a possibility. I'm sure there are situations where that is all that's involved. But I also believe that there is enough reality to demonic power that sorcery and curses really do work. Out in Nigeria, a man had become a Christian, and shortly after that, the Lord convicted him of a curse he had put on 3 people, which had caused them to go, what we would say, stark raving mad. They were wandering the streets naked as demented individuals. So he went out to the forest where he had worked the sorcery. He dug up the materials that had been buried there. He destroyed them and he canceled the curse in the name of Jesus, and then he went into town to find these people to apologize to them. By the time he found them, they were all clothed and in their right minds, all 3 of them. Now, there hadn't been any time for that to be a self-fulfilling prophecy on the negative, reversing this thing. It was simply that when the demons were called off in the name of Jesus, that the people reverted to their normal state. Some missionaries down in Peru were conducting children's Bible studies, and the children of the local witch doctor, occult practitioner, were coming to the studies, but they were so disruptive that the missionary had to finally forbid them to come. As a result of that, this occult practitioner came and put a curse on the missionary and his family, and they actually saw him apparently out in the street going through his incantations and so on, but they assumed that nothing could happen to them. They were missionaries, and these curses didn't affect them. It wasn't long after that their 2 teenage children got into problems. The son was literally arrested by the police for illegal activities. The daughter got involved sexually with some local young men. And they were, I'm not sure whether they had been sent home or about to be sent home, but at any rate, they finally took the curse seriously and claimed the breaking of the curse in the name of Christ, the power of the cross, and today, those young people are participating with their parents in the ministry in Peru and not being sent home because of their behavior. So we can't assume that because we're Christians, nothing can happen to us. I know of churches that have apparently had curses put on them. A pastor out in North Dakota called me a few years ago, first because he had just been confronted by a woman who seemed obviously to be demonized, and he needed some help in dealing with her. And shortly after that, I got a call saying that ever since they'd been at this church, there was like a blanket of some kind over the services. They just could get a handle on it, but there was just the spirit in the service was dead. The previous week, they understood that some disgruntled people who had been apparently disciplined by the church in the past because of occult activities had put curses on the church. They claimed the breaking of those curses, and they cleansed the building, and they said, "You wouldn't believe the difference in the service last Sunday." It was like that blanket was gone, and there was a spirit of freedom in the service. And I've heard that from other churches as well. So Satan will attempt anything, and if we take a passive attitude toward it instead of an active attitude, instead of resisting, we simply try to ignore it, it's apt to be effective on us. Yes?
What if you're unaware that this is happening?
Well, you certainly are going to begin to have, if you have symptoms like I've been mentioning in these cases, you begin to suspect that. I would assume that any time I'm working particularly in a mission situation, that the occult practitioners of the area are going to try to counter my work, and that I need to keep that defensive attitude toward that. I would take the same attitude in a church situation. Satan has to want to destroy the church, particularly if it's being effective. So if there is any evidence of life in your church and significant ministry, you have to believe that Satan will try to attack it in some way. And I would simply, on a routine basis, claim the breaking of curses. When I travel, I pray something like, Lord, I ask you to protect me from every device of the enemy and every carelessness of man. And simply put myself in God's hand, but assume that Satan would use any device he could to try to get me out of ministry. So I ask for that kind of protection, and I would make that a sort of standard procedure in the church.
What is it God to protect the church of persons?
What?
The church of persons.
Well, ultimately we'll have to ask him when we get there exactly what his rationale is, but I would suggest you read Paul Bilheimer's book, Destined for the Throne, and he will give you a more thorough explanation of why he allows this struggle to go on and why he requires us to do it. But basically, his position is that we are being trained for a position of authority and with Christ, and that we need to learn what the exercise of authority is. And if he simply exercises authority for us, he keeps us in a sort of perpetual childhood. He wants us to grow up, and therefore he says, I require that you use the resources that I've given to you, you use the privileges I've made available to you, because that's the only way you're going to become mature. If I do it, I keep you in a perpetual infancy. So in the Old Testament, while he always won the battles, he always made them go out into the battle. They had to engage the enemy in obedience before God worked. So he asks for us to be obedient in using the resources that are available to us, the weapons and the armor, and then he does the work. So that's my best explanation of why I think God doesn't do it automatically. Okay, one further thing, and that is the idea of careless exposure to demonic power, going on Satan's turf, as it were, his territory, carelessly. During the Second World War, we were mopping up in an area where the main part of the battle had already gone through, and we would simply, the whole unit would move in convoy fashion until we hit opposition, and then they'd set up and do whatever needed to be done to wipe out the opposition and move on until we hit it again. So we were kind of going and stopping and never knew when you were going to be moving and not moving. And we were a ways back in the convoy because I was a chaplain's assistant, and we didn't lead the way. We were basically with the service troops. Well, somebody in one of those stops went to sleep, and the convoy moved out, and this vehicle didn't. And when they woke up, the convoy was gone, and they missed a turn where they should have turned and took us right into enemy-held territory. Well, doesn't matter that you didn't intend to be on the enemy territory. You were, and you start getting shot at, and people can get hurt that way. And we had to beat a hasty retreat. It was a little awkward to turn around at that place, but we found a way to do it. And the principle is the same spiritually, that you don't go into Satan's territory carelessly. A missionary in Japan, a lady became strangely hateful in her attitudes toward her own children, having thoughts of killing her children. And she was sent home for treatment. A friend of mine met her out in New York State, and in ministering to her, encountered demon spirits who said they had come in when she and her husband went to a temple in Japan to observe a ceremony there. But they had gone with a tourist mentality, not with the mentality of an ambassador of the King of Kings. They went just to see, out of curiosity. And during the service, the priest literally prayed for the spirits to come upon the assembled group. And for the Japanese who did this on a regular basis, that was not anything unusual, but for these unprotected Christians, or Christians who were careless at least, the spirits came upon them and they didn't recognize it. The woman was delivered. Her hateful attitudes toward her children left. She was able to return to the field. Her husband had gone into a depression at about the same time, and they hadn't connected the two, but when deliverance took place, his depression left him as well, and they were restored to their ministries. There's a book called it's published under two titles. One is The Roaring Lion, and the other is Demons Are... Robert Peterson's book. Anyhow, it's on your bibliography. Suddenly the name won't come to me, but he tells of his experience like this, and he had an experience where he went out to take pictures of an Oriental procession with their big dragon and all of that, and again, his mentality was, boy, these will make great pictures, to show at home. There was no sense of, I'm encountering an experience that involves demonic activity, and I need to be have my armor on and whatever. And he had all kinds of problems with this. Missionary in the doctoral program was out in West Africa, and he one day hadn't been there very long, and he saw an African religious leader playing an African, we call them balas, a xylophone made out of wood and gourds and so on. And he was fascinated with this because he happened to play the marimba. So he got his camera, was going to take a picture of him. The man said, no picture. And he said, well, if I let you see my big bala in my house, can I take your picture? And if they do that, why let him take his picture? So he took his picture, and then he took him into the house and showed him his very beautiful instrument there and let him play it. He said as soon as that man started to play that, both he and his wife, just like something came over them, and he ran and got a blanket and threw it over the marimba and ushered the man out of his house. But here he said at the time he really had no perception of what was going on. But looking back on it, he had invited a pagan practitioner to play on his instrument, which had been dedicated to the glory and the use of God, and he was playing his pagan music on it. And that was simply like inviting the spirits to come, because they used the music to actually invite spirits to come. Well, carelessness can lead to that kind of danger. Many stories could be told about missionary children's schools. I've heard them from South America, from Africa, other places where simply because they were careless, didn't understand what was going on, Satan took advantage of that.
I think it was in Monday or Tuesday, I saw an article that was advertising a witchcraft lecture at Chicago City Library. In fact, it's supposed to take place this afternoon. And I was wondering, like in our communities, when things like that come up as part of an investigative type of visit, is that what you're talking about too? Would something like that be a careless encounter?
Yes. And by that I'm not saying you should never go. I'm saying that you shouldn't go carelessly, that you shouldn't go without realizing that you may be going onto Satan's. You've got to go on Satan's turf. You can't minister if you don't. But you don't go carelessly. So, yeah, when I was in Taiwan last, missionary friend there was taking me to the largest Taoist temple in Taiwan. And as we walked up to it, I said, Lord, I'm your servant. I go as your ambassador, and I don't go into this place carelessly. And I remember years ago being in Reno, Nevada, and being in the gambling casinos for the first time. I guess the only time. And on the one hand, it was fascinating. I'd never seen it before, and here there's all this gambling activity going on. If you look at it simply as a tourist, it was interesting. I saw a lady working 3 slot machines, and she had money in her hand, coins in her hand, that she could manipulate into those machines in almost a perfect rhythm like this, and it was fascinating. Except when you stop to say, what's really going on here? These are human beings. What's going on inside these people? What are they looking for and not finding? And it becomes a very depressing scene. Remember having the same experience in Broadway. In my naivete, this was way back during seminary days. I was walking down Broadway on a Saturday night, and I thought there must be a street meeting going on up there. So many people. And I got up there, that's how many people were there on Saturday night. I was thinking street meeting. Obviously, not very many people were thinking street meeting. And then I began to stop and look at the faces of these people and look in their eyes, and again ask the question, why are they here? What are they looking for? And again, it became a very depressing sort of thing. So your attitude toward where you are and what you're doing can be extremely critical in terms of how you respond and how you may become either a victor or a victim in any given situation. So I don't want you to hear me say you shouldn't ever go to places like that. It's simply that you have to be careful if you do. Well, we want to move then to the ministry level of power encounter. And we'll do it without an overhead for the time being. Yes, go ahead.
You have already addressed this question, but based on some of the statements you made earlier, I want to know if you thought whether Christians can be demon possessed.
Well, the answer is no. If you define possessed as being owned by the demon and totally controlled by them, if you mean can they be harassed and in some sense invaded, the answer is yes. There's abundant evidence that that's possible. Okay, we want to talk then about the ministry level, and here the Christian is on the initiative. We are not simply to be fighting defensive battles. Satan loves to get us in a totally defensive posture, and we must never allow him to get us so that we are simply reacting. We need to become proactive in relation to the enemy. We should be invading his territory, taking territory away from him, exerting the victory of Christ over him, not simply defending ourselves against his attack. So even in a one-to-one encounter where you're maybe having negative thoughts, for example, instead of just saying, Satan, go away, I command you, spirit, to go away that's doing this to me, and just keep taking that negative position, you simply do the resisting and then say, I choose to think God's thoughts, and immediately start claiming the promises, praising God, taking a proactive position of affirming the character of God, affirming the promises of God, the truth of God, as an aggressive stance rather than a defensive stance. So we need to be careful that we don't get into an attitude that simply says, I'm under attack, I have to defend myself. We need to move to the next stage, which says, I'm on the winning side, I need to claim the victory against the enemy. I am the one who has the truth that will liberate these people from the hand of the enemy, and I need to carry out that ministry to see them liberated. So, just as Jesus was always on the offensive, we need to be on the offensive. Now, Jesus obviously saw his ministry as a clash between two kingdoms. He said, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He taught his disciples to pray. He taught to say, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, as over against the kingdom of Satan, the god of this world. So it was a clash of kingdoms. It was a clash of power. In the Old Testament, the model we've referred to a number of times is very significant. Now, there are those who seem to have difficulty with this, calling it a metaphorical interpretation of the Old Testament. But it seems to me that the message is almost unmistakable, that the conquest of Canaan is a type of what might be called the sanctified life, or not, that's not the best term, the victorious life, the productive Christian life. The model is that Egypt is the type of sin and bondage. The Exodus is salvation. It is having the bondage of Egypt, of sin broken, and being brought into the freedom of the children of God, and with their faces toward the promised land. Then comes the wilderness, and there was that relatively short trip from Egypt to Kadesh Barnea via Sinai. And at Kadesh Barnea, they should have gone into the land. Why didn't they go into the land? Unbelief. Unbelief. They said, we can't do it. Now, Caleb and Joshua did. They had the right attitude. They said, let's go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. If the Lord delight in us, He will give us the victory. The other 10 spies said, no way we could ever take those walled cities, those giants. Their faith was only in human resources, and therefore they were discouraged. And people followed them, and so for 38 more years, they wandered in the wilderness. Now, we used to sing a song, a chorus that said, my Lord knows the way through the wilderness, all I have to do is follow. I say that song is all right if you're talking about the wilderness from the land of Goshen to Kadesh Barnea. But if you're talking about the wilderness experience from Kadesh Barnea around through Moab and Edom and up to Jericho, had no business being there. That's the type of spiritual mediocrity. That's settling for far less than what God had intended for their people. They had no business being in the wilderness. They were supposed to be in Canaan. They were supposed to be claiming their inheritance. Instead of that, they were wasting time, as it were, out in the wilderness. Now, they could say, look how good God is to us. And God didn't cast them off completely. He didn't disown them. He fed them with manna from heaven. Their clothes didn't wear out. They could count their blessings and say, God is good to us. But it wasn't where they were supposed to be. So they finally came up to the Jordan River across from Jericho, and then the question is again, will this time they obey? Will they trust? And faith and obedience are always the key factors in Israel's relationship to God and to their enemies. And the whole book of Deuteronomy is essentially Moses motivating the people to believe this time, to be true to their God. There are a lot of passages which in various ways state this principle. Proverbs 21:31 says, the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. You can count your chariots and horses and all of that, and ultimately that doesn't mean anything because victory rests with the Lord. Psalm 33:16, no king is saved by the size of his army. No warrior escapes by his great strength. It's God that gives the victory. Compare 2 Chronicles 20 situation where this vast army from Moab, Edom, and Mount Seir was coming against the children of Israel. And when Jehoshaphat prayed, he said to God, we have no power to face this vast army. But because they humbled themselves before God, God said, this is my battle. You're not even going to have to fight this one. This is the one they put the choir in front of the army, and the Lord sent ambushments against these people, and they fought each other and killed each other off, and Israel didn't even have to get into the battle. Psalm 81:13 and 14 says, if my people would but listen to me, if Israel would follow my ways, how quickly would I subdue their enemies and turn my hand against their foes? Psalm 124, first couple of verses say, if the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when men attacked us, when their anger flared against us, they would have swallowed us alive. And then down in verse 8 it says, our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Well, there one other passage, 2 Chronicles 14:11. Asa is facing Zerah the Cushite with another vast army, and he says to the Lord, Lord, there is no one like you to help the powerless against the mighty. No one like you to help the powerless against the mighty. Now that's the attitude that we've got to have. We, in our human resources, are powerless against this enemy. But there is no one like God to help the powerless against the mighty. That's when he gets glory. When it's clear that we are powerless against the enemy and it's God's victory. Now that's the model, and that was the way Canaan was conquered. Israel never won a battle, apparently, because of the size of her army, the superiority of her tactics or weapons or whatever. All of the allies in the world from Egypt or wherever they went for help didn't make any difference in winning or losing. They may have had something to do with losing, because when they were depending on that, that's why they lost. And in spite of what appeared to be a military superiority, they would still lose. So victory was always in the hands of the Lord. If you study the preparations that Israel made for the invasion of the Promised Land, they were essentially spiritual preparations. They didn't get siege weapons and battering rams and catapults and all of these weapons of war. They reinstituted the Passover and circumcision because that was the reminder of the covenant. They were a covenant people, and it was the power of God that had brought them out of Egypt through at the time of Passover. That's where, as you know, it was initiated. And it was the power of God that was going to win the battle there. And circumcision has something of a figure of death. The putting of the knife, as it were, to the flesh is somewhat symbolic of the dying to self, so that it's not me. It's not that's something I'm going to do. It's something God's going to do. I am a covenant person. I belong to God. And the covenant says, you obey and I will save you. So the issue always was the faith and the obedience of Israel. The bad news side of this was that while God had promised to give them the land, even to send an angel ahead of them and drive out the enemy, he said, I will not drive them out in a single year, but little by little I will drive them out before you until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. In our reference for that, Exodus 23:29 and 30, in our eagerness, we would like God to do it now. You know, we are like the man who prays, Lord, I want patience and I want it now. And lady came to old Stephen Merritt, early American preacher, and said she wanted him to pray for her that she'd have patience. And Stephen Merritt said, fine. They knelt down, he laid his hands on her and said, Lord, send this woman tribulation. Wait a minute, she said, I got plenty of that. He said, I need patience. said, well, my Bible says tribulation worketh patience. So the Lord allows these things to proceed at His pace, and as I say, they're not often our pace. We'd like them to happen faster, and this is part of the answer to the question that was asked earlier: why doesn't God automatically protect the church? He's growing us, and you grow by doing. You grow as you experience this, and then you do this, and then this, and it just takes time. And we've seen this many times in what God does with people in the healing process. On the other hand, the enemy was to be totally annihilated. One of the disturbing factors of Old Testament study is what you do with these exterminating wars. Now, if you again look at what it's modeling spiritually, it's saying you don't make any deals with the enemy. You don't make deals with Satan. You don't say to Satan, you leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. That's what they did with who were the ones that fooled them? Gibeonites. The Gibeonites, and they made a deal with them and promised not to attack them. Well, that was to their own detriment. You just dare not do that. This enemy is not to be tolerated one little bit. You just insist on complete victory. That doesn't answer all of the questions of what about all of the people in those nations that were destroyed. All I can say about that is that was God's decision, and God has the right to make that decision, and will not the judge of the whole earth do right? Those people were in the hands of Him who has infinite wisdom and love, and if He commanded them to be exterminated, they are in the hands of the one who knows how to deal with them. So we can't second guess God on that. But the message as far as spiritual warfare is concerned is that this enemy is to be utterly destroyed. You make no deals. Now the worldview of most of the people of the world will understand this really remarkably well. We have difficulty with it in the West because of our secularized worldview. But in most parts of the world, that's not true. One of the SEM students did an internship in Spain, and he wrote a remarkably insightful analysis of his experience there, and particularly in reference to this, and he was rather shocked, I think, to find such a strong lower crust of animism among these people. And that belief system was a powerful element in what appears to be this sort of post-Catholic culture over there. So it's a worldview that is very pervasive and that we need to be able to deal with. In the New Testament, Jesus is, of course, our model. He is the one who demonstrated how to proclaim truth and demonstrate power as two parts of the same ministry. Many interpreters say that the miracles of Jesus and the apostles were for two reasons. One, to confirm the identity of Jesus as Messiah, and second, to establish the truthfulness of the gospel message. But once that was done, there was no need for further miracles to identify or confirm these things. I simply have great difficulty with that. I don't think the scriptures anywhere say that. And if those people in the first century needed miracles to establish the truthfulness of what they were hearing, why don't the people out in Timbuktu, who have no background, no Jewish background to understand it, need some confirmation that this may be true? And the whole worldview that is so power-oriented. I think earlier we may have talked about this briefly, that the experts say that people change their religion over the issue of power far more often than over the issue of truth. Now, that isn't to say that truth isn't important, but it is to say that in the minds of many people, power is the issue, and that the demonstration of power is a critical part of ministry. And therefore, power encounter should be a normal part, particularly of missionary ministry, because it's at the frontiers of the church that God is working in that way. Yes?
Does when a power encounter occurs, and like let's say something that goes along with this to make the gospel seem like authentic to the people, is that because of what you were talking about earlier about us having authority through Christ over things that Satan has done, or is it because God has chosen to just break through at this one time? In other words, what I'm saying is it the type of thing that we can claim at any time, or is it the type of thing that God, boom, I'm going to do this right here, but you're not going to be able to do this all the time?
Well, I think that it's always done under His lordship. We don't take the initiative in saying we're going to have something spectacular happen. I don't decide this morning that I'm going to do a miracle up here and to prove to you that miracles happen. If God didn't want that to happen, it wouldn't happen. On the other hand, I think that God sometimes waits for us to take the first step of faith in order for Him to operate, so that there is a sort of a balance between these two. There are power encounters that have strong human element to them, where the activity of the individual Christian seems to be critical in what happens. There are others where it almost appears that God is acting sovereignly. Now, I think that God, even in those times when it seems that this is purely the act of God, He probably is acting in response to prayer that may not be visible, but nevertheless is the thing which releases the power of God. I subscribe generally to the principle that within that leash area that we talked about, that God operates only in relation to our faith and obedience, so that He has essentially put this self-limitation on Himself. He has reserved a whole area for His sovereign power, and there are areas where He works sovereignly, but there are certain areas where He does operate only in response to our faith. And so I think that people are always involved in that, but it's not on a name it and claim it basis. It's on this very dynamic relationship which we have with Him, where He guides us, gives us the impulse to do it. It's Paul, perceiving that the man had faith to be healed, said, "Stand on your feet." The Lord put the inclination in Paul that the man had faith to be healed, so He initiated it in that sense, but Paul had to take the step of obedience before the healing actually took place. So the two things just seem to work very closely together. Now, I know that there is a whole theological system which has great difficulty with any contingency on what God does on man's part. But it seems to me that the Scriptures say, "You have not because you ask not. I sought for a man and I found none." It says, "I couldn't do it because there was no intercessor." The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show Himself strong on behalf of him whose heart is fully committed to Him. And the implication again is that apart from that fully committed heart, God has placed a limitation on what He will do in those situations.
Similar to that, if you're dealing with someone who's an alcoholic or some type of disease, Christian or non-Christian, is that, would you pray against, how would you do that or deal with that, or would you base that on any type of demon?
Well, in dealing with anyone like that, you have to look at all the factors that are involved. I'm sure there are those who would give you a simplistic answer to that alcoholism is always demonic. And I would assume that there probably is always some demonic activity, that they're always going to take advantage of that kind of a problem in a person's life. but I would want to know about their family. I'd want to know about the childhood, about traumas, about other areas of bondage in their lives, many things that might be connected with that. And I would assume that there probably is some family history that is being repeated. Maybe not alcoholism per se, but some compulsive behavior that the demons are reproducing in the offspring. But again, you would just have to look at all of the factors that are involved before you could say. Well, I've probably taken more time than I should on all of these sort of preliminary things about power encounter at this level. Let me simply go one step further on this and say that we have the Old Testament model, we have the model of Jesus, and then we have the model of Paul. And Paul again combined the proclamation and the demonstration as part of his ministry. Now, I know the argument always is, but he was an apostle. I guess I simply don't accept that limitation that all of this activity stopped with the apostles. That when Jesus said, the works that I do shall you do, and greater works than these shall you do, that he was really talking about these kinds of demonstrations of power over the enemy. And again, it's not that I take the initiative on myself. It's not that I ever am the one who is in control. I am simply the agent that God uses, but God is still doing it. And he is still using human agents to carry out these kinds of ministries, both proclamation and demonstration. So our commission is to invade Satan's territory, to be proactive, to be on the offensive against the enemy, to be claiming his territory, really claiming God's territory back from the enemy who has usurped it, and thus establishing what we call the kingdom of God. So I'm espousing a kingdom theology that says it was established at the cross, it is being established now, it will ultimately be established at the second coming in its final form. But we are definitely involved in that kind of a kingdom struggle. The man who is the president of the Evangelical Church of India says it is folly to send missionaries to India, Indian or American, to work in areas of India without distinct capabilities and experience in the area of power encounter. In the Madras Bible Seminary, a seminary operated by the church of which this man is the head, they have power encounter training, and there are churches where almost everybody in the church came to Christ through some kind of power encounter. This is a school where a student is expected to plant a church before he graduates, so that he can go be its pastor when he graduates. So you go out and create your own church pastor. The student's survival is contingent upon his ability to multiply churches. ECI church planters would be ineffective to the point of uselessness, this man says, if they shied away from power encounters. Instruction in casting out demons and praying for the sick is part of the course material at ECI seminaries. I'm excited to see that some seminaries in the U.S. are finally working, he says, something what we're doing. But so prevalent is satanic activity that in certain areas virtually everyone reached by the evangelistic church planting teams is in need of deliverance from some form of evil. We have whole churches full of people won dramatically away from demonic forces. We'll pursue that in terms of the various areas of ministry next time. I'm afraid it's too late in the period to start a new topic right now. So we'll see you next week. Some of you have asked about the tapes. We will have some word for you next week about how they will be available and when and what conditions and so on.